Good afternoon and welcome to the Bennington Community Policing Advisory Review Board meeting of October 23rd, 2025. I'd like to start with introductions. I'm the chair, Kate Cost. If we could start with you.
Scott Frost.
Scott Richmond.
Jeff Vickers.
Lonnie DePontesorda.
Jesse McFarland.
And Clark Adams. No, but you are our liaison.
Well, not part of the board. I'm a liaison with the select board for the seat part. My name is Clark Adams.
Thank you. Scott, could you read the town vision? Scott, Jesse. It's been floating around for the last 5 minutes, so I wasn't sure where it has landed.
Bennington is a welcoming, engaged, inclusive, and resilient community where everyone, regardless of identity, shares in our vitality and benefits from an outstanding quality of life.
Thank you. I need the consent of agenda, and I have one change that is actually under announcements that I'd like approval for. The BPD budget meeting presentation is in January and not in December. Can I have a motion to approve that?
I'll make a motion we approve as amended.
Second?
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Any abstentions? All right, thank you. Motion passes. So consent of the agenda as corrected. Need a motion to approve the amended agenda?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you. And now I need approval of the meeting's minutes. Are there any corrections or additions to the minutes? None?
I'll make a motion we accept the minutes as written.
All right. Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Any abstentions? I probably need to abstain. The two new folks who were just appointed probably need to abstain, just as a point of information, just because you weren't here. All right, thank you. Motion passes. All right, and then, so we have no public comment, then I'd like to move directly to our presentation on Act 56 by Director Christopher Bacall, Vermont Police Academy.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So just for introduction's sake, my name is Chris Bacall. A little background on me. I was in law enforcement for 36 years. I served 1 week short of 20 years in the town of Manchester, north of you. And then I served another 16 years in the town of Brandon, the last 13 years as the chief of police there. So I have some familiarity with law enforcement procedures, problems that occur in law enforcement, and have some relationships with most of the chiefs and sheriffs throughout the state. Chief Doucette, I know fairly well from my years when I was down here in Manchester. And I also just wanted to, if I could also introduce, I'm sure probably folks here know him, but Sean Pratt, who is a governor-appointed seat on the Vermont Criminal Justice Council. He represents the NAACP on the council as that seat. But more importantly, Sean sits on the Professional Regulations Subcommittee. And what that is it's a subcommittee of 5 members of our council that what they do is they review all law enforcement unprofessional conduct complaints. They review all the internal affairs documents, video, audio, statements that are made by people, and then that group of 5 votes out what they feel is the appropriate category, which I'll get into here shortly. And then they make a recommendation that goes to the full 24-person council. And then if there's either a stipulated agreement or an action that is taken against an officer's certification, they are the body that starts that process. Then when it goes to the full council, they stay out of it. They don't have any voice in what the rest of the council hears. So Sean plays an important role on our council, and you're fortunate to have him locally so that he can be an asset to you for anybody that wants to reach out to him as well. So let me move on to a little bit about Act 56. Act 56 became law in 2017, actually started July of 2018. And the reason that it became law was because of the fact that there's no standardization throughout the state on law enforcement policies and law enforcement responsibilities. So every agency throughout the state can have their own set of policies. And some have very widely different policies. So one of the assets that the town of Bennington has as being a member of the Vermont Leagues of Cities and Towns, they offer as part of their service is a set of policies that the chief can follow if he wants to, or he can modify to suit the needs of the Bennington Police Department. But having said that, and every agency being able to have their own policies, that's why Act 56 was enacted into law. And Act 56 also changed in January of this year of 2025, which was a major change that enacted what we called the Code of Conduct and shortened up a Category B. So it addresses both off-duty and on-duty conduct now, where the prior law only really impacted most of the unethical behavior if you were on duty, not necessarily off duty. So let's look at, first off, what agencies have. So every agency has to have an internal affairs policy that they have to follow and that they have to investigate. We have a statewide policy on our website at the Academy that they can use as a model if they choose to. Some agencies will use the model that's developed by the IACP, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and there are other models that agencies can use or they can create their own. But we have one model policy that works for us that they can use as well. So there's three categories of violations under Act 56. There's Category A, Category B, and Category C. The most general one that we deal with is Category B, but we'll start with Category A. So before Act 56 was law, the only time that a law enforcement officer could be decertified by the council was if they were convicted of a felony crime or they didn't do the required training. Pretty sad when you think about it for some other behaviors that can happen. So this law actually corrects a lot of that. So Category A is a felony, whether you're on or off duty, a misdemeanor that's committed on duty that didn't have a legitimate need for the performance of your duty, or any of the following misdemeanors that were committed off duty, and then it lists several offenses there. What that did is that takes all criminal conduct. So if a law enforcement commits criminal conduct, what the process for that would be is a criminal investigation would take place on the allegation, and the agency that has the officer involved would put their internal affairs investigation on hold. And the reason for that is because you can't compel somebody to give testimony about themselves in an internal affairs document, and or it will conflict with the criminal investigation. So they can run in tandem, but most agencies will put their internal affairs investigation on hold so as not to interfere with a criminal investigation. Then when the investigation is done, the criminal end, that's when the agency picks back up with their internal affairs investigation. So that's essentially the way that the criminal conduct works. And then when that's done, the internal affairs investigation comes to us at the council, and that's when the professional regulation subcommittee would take a look at the documents there. They would have access to the criminal investigation, and they would have access to the internal affairs investigation. We don't see a lot of Category A conduct, which is a good thing, because we don't want law enforcement committing crimes, whether it's on or off duty. Category B, now I'm going to give you both the prior and then I'm going to give you the current. So right now, this is the prior. So prior to January 1 of 2025, Category B conduct was defined as gross professional misconduct amounting to actions on duty and under the authority of the state or both that involved a willful failure to comply with a state-required policy or a substantial deviation from professional conduct as defined by the law enforcement agency's policy. So you can imagine that there were some complaints about law enforcement officers of actions that they might have done, and somebody said, I know that person, they're a law enforcement officer for this agency, but they weren't on duty, so there was nothing that could be done about it. Even though they might have been using their law enforcement authority, nothing could be done by the council in those circumstances because the officer wasn't on duty. And then the other important part of that is that it has to be a willful act that the person is doing. It can't be unintentional. So you had to have those two things in concert. And then what it does is it says of a state-required policy and then lists several other policies in there, such as sexual harassment, misuse of position for personal or economic gain, excessive use of force for a first offense. Those are all the Category Bs prior. Don't get yourself too wrapped up in that now because we're beyond that. Now we're into 2025 and most of our cases have been resolved from prior to 2025. Category B conduct today is much simpler. It's a willful failure to comply with a state-required policy or the law enforcement officer's code of conduct. The legislature gave us the authority at the council to create a code of conduct that would encapsulate all of the things that we were seeing that was bad behavior. And we wanted to outline everything that we thought would capture what people expect of their law enforcement officers in Vermont. They want to make sure that they're doing the right thing and their behavior is ethical. And in addition to this, under this Category B, now the council can take action on a first offense for everything, and if it's on or off duty. So that's a big leap. And that took us some time to get to that code of conduct, and the code of conduct was created by a large group of people. So law enforcement was a part of that. The Attorney General's office was a part of that. We had unions that were a part of that. We had every person that would be impacted by a certification loss be a part of that conversation to make sure that we weren't overstepping our bounds and that everybody had their voice heard at the table before that went to that. So as of right now, that's exactly what we can do with a Category B. So let me give you an example of kind of some of the things that that are kind of unique in law enforcement as far as like having policies. And most people know that police pursuits are dangerous, right? And regardless of what the pursuit is for, they're risky, and you risk a lot of people's lives, and you want to make sure that you're doing it for the right reason. Every agency can have their own policy about pursuits, when to do them, when to cut them off, what the stipulations are, whether your agency allows somebody to have a pursuit policy or not. And most, generally speaking, right now, most agencies will say, we will not allow a pursuit to take place unless there's a criminal act that begins and starts for the reason of the pursuit. So if somebody goes flying by you excessively fast, a speeding violation is not a reason if somebody doesn't stop to engage in a pursuit. That's a civil violation. Makes sense, right? But there is no statewide policy on that. So you could have somebody that violates their department's policy if they're engaged in a pursuit, but if their agency didn't have that it had to have a criminal violation to begin with, they might not be in violation of policy. So it might not get to us as a Category B offense. So the one thing that's important for folks to know is that Category B, which is the most that we see, what happens when it gets reported to us at the council, it immediately goes back to the agency. It's your employee. You have the information. They have to do an internal affairs investigation. And they have to do all of that background, find out what the complaint was about, speak to the officer, speak to the complainant, review body camera video, in-car camera video, anything that has to do with that complaint. And then when the agency is done, they make a conclusion and they send that packet to us. And that's when it comes to the Professional Regulation Subcommittee. Now, there have been complaints that have come to us where an agency has said, here's what we're telling the officer is going to happen to them as a result of that violation. And there have been times when the subcommittee has said, that's not anywhere near appropriate. That needs to be looked at much closer. So they'll send it back to the agency and have the agency look at it again. They can also override that. They can say and make recommendations to the full council that go beyond that. But now, the law is a little bit different. So now, under the new Category B, the council cannot take action other than what the agency has done as a result of their internal affairs investigation, unless several things happen and they're out of complaint. So there is variations where the council can take action beyond it, but for now, most of the time, when an agency recommends what their penalty is to that person, the council will essentially go along with that unless there's some egregious reason not to, or the agency hasn't done their job. And then there's the third category, which is Category C. And the Category C is really all about council process and the things that we do at the Vermont Criminal Justice Council. So if somebody exceeds their scope of practice that they're certified for, that's a council action. If they make knowingly false reports or statements to the council, falsification of council documents, if they interfere with a council investigation, those are all things that the council body itself takes and investigates. We don't put that back to an agency to be responsible for that, just so that there's some clarity there. So who makes the report? Anybody, right? We take reports from anybody. We take reports from any source, just like your law enforcement agency does. They're required to take reports from any source. So if somebody wants to email, they want to send it anonymously, they want to call us, they want to put it on our web form where they can actually make the complaint, and they can do that anonymously if they choose to do that. So we will take complaints from any source, and then what happens is it's up to the executive officer of the agency to report that to us. And so outlined in statute, it says the executive officer of the law enforcement agency or the chair of their civilian review board. So either or sometimes both, can make the complaint. Typically, if there is a civilian review board, they rely on their agency head to make that complaint, or they will make that complaint to their agency head and then expect that to come to us. But there's that piece there in the statute so that either or could make it in the event that you had an agency head that didn't agree that it was something that needed to come to us, and the civilian review board felt, no, we do. We think it needs to be reviewed. And if you did and you sent it to us, by law, we have to go back to the chief and say, you have to investigate this. So there's safeguards in place to make sure that we're getting all of the information that we're supposed to. If an officer violates or allegedly violates any statewide policy, that's a Category B violation. If an officer commits a violation of the code of conduct or is reported to have, then that gets sent to us in the way of an intake form. It comes to us as an Act 56 report. That way we know who the officer is involved, what the category of the complaint is, and then there's a documentation trail that starts from that initial one that we get that lets us track where that complaint goes to. Reports to us should come in a timely manner, but for the most part, there are statutory regulations that also give people up to 10 business days to make the report once there's a viable complaint made. And sometimes we're not real strict on that because sometimes an agency just doesn't know until they start to investigate. Sometimes it takes longer than 10 days to find out that there is really a viable complaint. What we don't take are complaints about, we have an officer that was disrespectful to me when I was talking to him, or didn't listen to my complaint, or didn't investigate it thoroughly. That's not unprofessional conduct. That's an officer issue that we will refer back to the agency or to that person to say, check in with your agency. That's their responsibility to investigate. That's not an unprofessional conduct complaint. So we never ignore anybody that gives us a complaint, even if it doesn't rise to the level of something that we should be investigating. Any questions so far? I should have asked that, sorry. Okay, so for a Category A on reporting, when there's a finding of probable cause by a court, then that notice has to come to us. If there's a decision or a finding of fact or verdict regarding any allegation that the officer committed Category A conduct, or a judicial decision or an appeal from a decision, it has to come to us. For a Category B, if the agency receives a credible complaint that the officer has allegedly committed Category B conduct, it has to come to us. And also, if an agency terminates somebody, they still have to do an internal affairs investigation. Now, that's difficult at times because if an agency terminates somebody, the officer may not talk to them. They may not want to be interviewed on what the cause was for their termination. But it's still the agency's responsibility to conduct and complete that internal affairs investigation to the best of their ability. And in addition to that, if an officer resigns, sometimes we'll see that where an officer has taken some kind of action that's questionable, and an agency wants to start an internal affairs investigation, and then the officer resigns. What do they do then? Again, the agency head still has that responsibility to follow through with an internal affairs investigation to the best of their ability. Then they submit all that documentation to us, and we go from there. So there is no way for a person to just escape an investigation if there's alleged conduct that they've committed. So Act 56 puts this burden onto the Vermont Criminal Justice Council. So we are responsible we are the body that gives certification to law enforcement officers. So we are the same body that can take that certification away or put sanctions on that certification. The allegations against officers both on and off duty of unprofessional conduct therefore fall under our purview, and then conduct that does not fall under us will not be investigated. We will make it clear to the person that's made the complaint that it doesn't fall within the statutory parameters, and then we will hopefully direct them to the agency to connect with the agency about whatever the issue is. Any questions on that piece so far? Okay. When there's a termination, a resignation, or a suspension, that doesn't mean that that whole investigation goes away. As I said earlier, that still has to be completed, and that information still has to come back to us. All Act 56 allegations are confidential by law, and so when an agency sends me a report that they're making their initial report, and then they complete their internal affairs investigation, the only thing that they are going to know is when that investigation is complete and the council has taken action to the end of their ability to do that. So if there's no action that's taken, the officer involved will get that notice, and the agency head who made the complaint will get that notice. If there is action, that will now, as of 2025, be public-facing on our website. So before that, we were not allowed by law, by the confidentiality regulations, we could only list that a complaint was received and what category it was and if there was an outcome. But we couldn't identify who the officer was. We couldn't identify what the agency was. Now, we can do that because the council is able to take sanctions on a first offense. There is also a written waiver process for the purposes of background investigations that specifically includes any release of VCJC records, and only training records can be released. So if an outside agency calls the academy and they say, we're thinking about hiring this person, we'd like to know if there's any Act 56 complaints. Unless it's public information, we can't even acknowledge that a complaint exists. So there is a caveat to fix that in law, and I just had this discussion with two agency heads today. There's an agency head, and this will give you an example of how this works. A complaint was made to an agency. They started an internal affairs investigation. The officer resigned the same day. That officer is now applying to another agency. And so the agency head from where that person just resigned called me and said, what am I supposed to do? I haven't done an investigation yet, and I know that they're already applying at another agency. So the law requires that before an officer can be hired in Vermont, that officer has to sign a waiver for the hiring agency, that allows that hiring agency to contact any former law enforcement officer or agency in the state of Vermont that they've worked, and then that information has to be released to them about their work history and the reason for their leaving, if they know what the reason was, or the reason for their termination. And then the liability piece is removed from the agency because that's covered in law. So there's that section that helps agencies to interact with each other, even though they can't act with us directly. So that kind of covers that. A lot of agencies sometimes will forget that piece, and I don't mean forget it in that not follow it, but they'll know that they have to connect with the former agency, and they'll call. But the statute is very clear that they have to provide a written document, and they have to as well give that written document to the officer who's looking to be employed elsewhere. So there's a paper trail that everybody has done what they were supposed to be doing per statute. Did you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thank you. I wondered if there were relationships with other states to find out if there were complaints.
There is not.
Okay.
But having said that, there's another important factor. When an officer is sanctioned by the council and/or decertified, we report to the National Decertification Index, the NDI, which is it's a site listed on another site which is called IATLIST. It's the International Association of Directors of Law Enforcement Standards and Training. They house a national index that every state that belongs to IATLIST can sign into, and we report whatever the sanction was that's there. And it doesn't give details about the sanction, but it's a pointer system. So if another state, if somebody leaves Vermont and they're going to another state, that state can check the NDI, see if there's any record, and then it will tell them that, yes, we hold a record. And then when they call us, we can say, go to this agency where they used to work. They'll give you the details about what took place. So there is safeguards there, but the law that requires agency heads to agency head here in Vermont doesn't apply out of state. We only control what happens in state. So, but that's an important piece to know, that there, for those that might leave the state or for those that are coming in from out of state, agencies here have the ability to check the NDI as well. So how, we talked about this a little bit, but how is the actual Act 56 allegation handled? Again, we can take this complaint from any multiple avenues, whether it's our website, a phone call, an email. After the allegation is reviewed, it has to be accepted by me before it goes for any kind of investigation. If it doesn't meet the criteria, I will do my best to explain to that person why it doesn't meet the criteria, and then offer suggestions for them as to how they can take their complaint further. Once it's completed, then it goes to the investigator. For us, will either do that, or it will go to the Professional Regulations Subcommittee. And then once they review it, they will have either a finding of A, B, or C category, or a finding of no finding if they found that there was no unprofessional conduct that took place. And then that complaint will receive a notification with the limited information that we're allowed to provide out to the general public. Council permitted sanctions. These are essentially what the council can do before a Category B complaint is completed under the new law. So we could issue a written warning to somebody. We could suspend them, but it has to run concurrently with the length and time that the agency finds that suspension. We can revoke their certification with the option of recertification or a permanent revocation. Those are the four options that the council has by law. And so a first offense of Category B, which now we can take action on, this is kind of lengthy, so I put it all in here just so that you understand what our limitations are and what we can do over and above if an agency doesn't do what they should. So for a first offense, we can only take the same punishment to the extent that the sanction does not surpass any disciplinary action taken by the law enforcement agency. That's what we're supposed to do. And then there's the big unless, and then there's a whole laundry list. So if the law enforcement officer is terminated for the same alleged conduct or resigns and the agency doesn't take appropriate action, or if the alleged conduct is committed by the law enforcement officer, the executive of that law enforcement agency, we can go beyond that. Pursuant to Section 2408, the law enforcement agency fails to conduct a valid investigation, we can conduct our own and provide whatever sanction we feel is appropriate. The disciplinary action taken against the officer by the law enforcement agency is clearly unreasonable, and then it's considering the following factors: the nature and the seriousness of the offense, the law enforcement officer's job level, certification level, and type of employment, the past disciplinary record of the officer's work record. All of these things have to be taken into account, too, by the agency head when they're delivering their sanction. The effect of the offense on the law enforcement officer's ability to perform satisfactorily, the consistency of the penalty with those imposed upon other similarly situated people that are within the same agency, the consistency of the applicable agency table of penalties, the notoriety of the offense or the impact that it's had on the agency as a result of that. So you can see there are several factors that we can still go above what the agency has recommended if, in fact, the agency doesn't do something that's reasonable. Upon the notification, they should do their valid investigation or seek outside agencies to do that if they can. Most agencies in Vermont will, I shouldn't say most, there's a handful of agencies that will conduct their own internal affairs investigation, state police being one of them. They have their own internal affairs investigation unit that does solely that. Most agencies in Vermont don't spend a lot of time on that because they don't have complaints that rise to that level. So when it does happen, they have to determine whether they're capable of doing that internal affairs investigation on their own and keeping an open mind and treating everybody fairly, or do they reach out to another agency to do it? That's a common practice in Vermont as well. Agencies might reach out to a neighboring agency, so it removes the people that you work with from that factor. Upon the conclusion, again, all the materials come to us, and that includes any kind of recordings, body camera video. Only the allegations that are substantiated, and there's a finding of one of the three categories, will there be any public information released. That's the only time that we can do it by law. And unsubstantiated, or when there is a no finding, that will all remain confidential. And as you can imagine, an officer that gets accused of something that ends up being unfounded, we don't want to make somebody's name be on our website for something that there was no finding of unprofessional conduct. And then conduct that occurred after January 1 of 2025, where there's a finding of unprofessional conduct of all three of the categories. There will be the name of the officer's agency, and they will all be listed on the website. We will also be posting what the violation was, not the details of the violation, but the violation itself. And then lastly, I just wanted to give you, and we can make these available to you, but this is the code of conduct itself, and it covers untruthfulness, discrimination, misuse of official position, domestic violence, unlawful uses of force, criminal conduct, sexual misconduct, falsification and misuse of property and evidence, bribes, and then cheating on exams. This was really comprehensive. It doesn't sound like it when you first read it, but it covers almost everything that we have seen. And this was with checking with all 50 states on those that have a code of conduct, what's in their code of conduct, and how does it measure up? Have you seen cases that have fallen through the cracks? So that's really the explanation of Act 56, and it's kind of convoluted at times. You really have to read it. I continually read it every day, even when we get a complaint. But I just want you to know that I've had personally relationships and conversations with Chief Doucette where he might have action or questions on an Act 56 possibility. Does this rise to the level, or is this just a complaint, or is this something that I can handle? So we have good open communication. Most chiefs and sheriffs are open-minded. They'll call us if there's any questions because they don't want to not report. And the majority of the reports that we get, and I think Sean can verify this for me, is that they come from agencies. They don't come from the general public. Most of the complaints that we get are coming from law enforcement agencies holding their own people accountable. So while we do get them from the public, law enforcement understands the necessity, the importance, and the accountability that the people of the state of Vermont expect of their law enforcement officers and holding them accountable. One more thing also, just for you to know, is that, and I'm not trying to prop him up because he doesn't need any propping up of himself, but we had a recent conversation with Chief Doucette because he got one of my infamous, we're coming to do an audit of your records. We, at the council, were audited by the state auditor's office 3 years ago, and one of the things that they found that we didn't do well was reaching out to agencies and auditing the records that they submit to us to verify what they're actually sending to us. And they were right. We didn't do a good job of that. One, we don't have the resources, the staffing, or the personnel to do it. But since the advent of us being able to hire an investigator, we have started to do that. And I think Chief Doucette felt like, oh, great, so you're picking on me, right? And no, what we did was we started with the agency's records that the auditor's office looked at, and I can tell you straight-faced that his office was one of the best offices that we've audited. My investigator came back and was totally impressed with the preparedness that they had gotten all the documentation ahead of time. And we do that because we want agencies to be successful, right? We want to be working in collaboration with them. We want them to have all the policies that they're supposed to have. We want to make sure that their training records are accurate because if there's ever a question of it, not only do they have to answer it to it, but so do we. So we want to make sure that they're tracking the same things that we're tracking and that they're doing it correctly. So congratulations to Chief Doucette. I didn't get a chance to tell him that directly, but he's one of the few agencies, I will say, that I've heard great positive feedback from my investigator having done that. Sean, did you have something?
No, I just wanted to, because I know you talked
Excuse
about-
me, could you go to the microphone? Just because of the home audience, they may not be able to.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, thank you.
No, when you mentioned earlier that, because I remember in the beginning when we had some cases, I know it was a few community members that did send some complaints. So I just wanted to say we do look at the community members' complaints. Just because it's not coming from an agency head, we still look at those cases. So.
Yeah, and I guess I thought that was probably covered in when we take complaints from any source, and we really do. I've had Sean send me an email with, hey, did you see this on the news? We actually sometimes learn of alleged misconduct by a news media report before it even comes to us, so it's something that we can start an investigation on. But I think Sean brings up a good point, is that my hope is that when you have an asset like him in your community, that there is some transparency, that there's some questions that people of your own community could ask him directly. If they don't feel comfortable going to the police or they don't feel comfortable coming to us at the council, they can ask Sean. Like, he's going to give them the real story, and he's not going to share anything that's confidential because he can't, and then he'd be off the committee, and he doesn't want to risk that because he really is a valued member. His perspective is so different than our subcommittee that reviews all of these complaints. Is made up of a person who serves on the Network for Domestic Violence, a former police chief who now represents the Vermont Leagues of Cities and Towns, everyone's insurer for the most part, a current chief of police, and then two community members, Sean being one representing the NAACP, and Kareem, who represents, I believe, the psychiatric survivors. So there's a lot of lively discussion, and as you can imagine, very different viewpoints of when they see a body camera video of an officer's actions. And within that small group of 5 people, I will say that the dialogue is always respectful. They're learning things about each other and other people's perspective about police actions. And I think Sean will probably acknowledge that there's times that he sees something that he's like, okay, I didn't realize that that was the procedure, or that's what the policy says that they're supposed to do. But also, conversely, he's brought something up that you don't understand how that impacts that person differently than it impacts this person. So he's got a very valuable perspective on the complaints that come our way. So I would encourage you to reach out to him locally as an asset. Yes?
Is there an appeals process?
I'm sorry?
Is there an appeal process?
There is an appeal process when somebody has a certification action taken. That appeal process is to the Supreme Court. And so any action that the council takes is through the Administrative Procedures Act. And so there is a sanction, but it's against the officer's certification. Here's the one thing that also we try to make sure that people are very clear on. Our action is a certification action. The chief's action is an employment action, right? They're two separate processes. So while our certification action might impact employment, it doesn't always necessarily impact employment. So while we do work together in those arenas, he has a separate track that he has to follow as an employer and making sure that people are following your work policies, his policies, and he doesn't have to worry about their certification. He has to worry about, are they doing the right thing as an employee for the town of Bennington, where we have to worry about not so much whether they're following the town's policies, but whether they're following state statute and their certification obligations. But the appeal process for somebody that doesn't agree with a council decision is to the Vermont Supreme Court. There has been only one case so far, which is public, which was the Franklin County Sheriff who was decertified by the council, and that was appealed to the Vermont Supreme Court, and he lost that appeal. Now, having said that, sheriffs are a little bit different because sheriffs are elected officials. So while that sheriff has no certification and he has no law enforcement authority to act as a law enforcement officer, he does have certain statutory rights as an elected official. He can still run his office. He can still do administrative tasks. He can still, oddly enough, oversee internal affairs investigations. So there's caveats to elected officials that are a little bit different that I know the legislature has worked on. They just haven't really come to a resolution on what's the best solution for that. Good question, though.
Other questions from the board?
Can loss of certification lead to a private suit?
So loss of certification would essentially take somebody, they could still be employed by a law enforcement agency, but they wouldn't have law enforcement authority. So they could work in a civilian capacity, or they could work, and I can't imagine this would happen, but in theory, if a chief of police had his certification sanctioned, and the town felt really supportive of that chief and didn't feel that they wanted to fire this person or terminate them, they could keep him on as an administrative chief or her on as administrative chief if they felt like they had other talents that they could be used other ways. But they wouldn't be able to take a law enforcement action. They wouldn't be able to stop motor vehicles. They wouldn't be able to arrest people. They wouldn't be able to write an affidavit of probable cause for a court. So essentially, without your certification, it's very difficult to do the job of a law enforcement officer.
Other questions from the board? From the community? Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
Since the changes, have you noticed an increase in the number of things you're dealing with, or has it stayed similar to before the changes?
We haven't noticed an increase in the number of complaints. They stay pretty steady, and they're not as many as a lot of people might think. A lot of the complaints that we get from the public don't rise to the level of unprofessional conduct. They're really people that have complaints that they're taking them to the highest step first rather than reaching out to the agency directly. And we'll always try to refer them to those right people. And by the way, if you're saying to me that you've reached out to the chief of police but they're ignoring you, well, you can go to the town manager. There's steps that you can take to try to have yourself heard, but we're not the body that does that. But as far as any more complaints because of this change, not really. I think what folks are understanding better is that it's much simpler to follow now. So they only have to worry about it's a state mandated policy or it's a violation of the code of conduct. And that code of conduct actually encompasses everything that was in the prior category B, so we didn't leave anything out that was there before. Everything is still there, but what we gained from that was we can take action on a first offense, and we can take action on an officer certification, whether it's on duty or off duty.
Do you track, once an investigation is open and it does rise to the level where you're reviewing it, does that typically end in some sort of an action, or what kind of percentage end up being maybe unfounded? Do you track that?
So when you say what ends up in an action, I look at unfounded as an action too, right?
Okay.
Yes, it's either a finding of one of the three categories, or it's a finding that the allegation was unfounded. And
okay,
that is an action too, because as you can imagine, the agency and the officer are waiting for that. And, you know, we also encourage agency heads to, when they're not sure, or they have a complaint that sounds like it's just a complaint, but it might be something else and they don't know till they investigate it, to make the report to us, right? Because that way it puts us on notice that there might be something coming. And a lot of agencies are very good about getting back to us and say, we investigated this, it's not a reportable Act 56 violation. But for those that aren't good about getting back to us, now we have a way to track that, and we reach back out to them and say, hey, whatever happened to this investigation? What was your finding? Is that something that needs to come to us? And, you know, sometimes law enforcement's got a pretty tough job with the amount of things that they need to keep up with on a regular basis. So they might assign that investigation to somebody and then lose track of that just because of all the other ongoings in their community. So it's really a good help for us to get back and forth and make sure that there's no balls that are dropped. Yes?
I'm just curious, has the number of applications to the Vermont Police Academy been affected by Act 56?
Good question, and I don't really have an answer to. I wouldn't say that that's an impact for people that apply to the profession. There's a whole, everyone has a different opinion about what keeps people from getting into the profession. Some say it's not as desirable a profession as it used to be. It's not held in as high regard as it used to be. Others feel just the opposite. Some feel that the current training model that we use, which is a 17-week residential model, is not the best way, that we should be doing a collegiate model. And while those arguments have been heard for many years, in fact, we just finished another committee meeting of what an alternative path could look like. And what it boils down to is that regardless of, when somebody says, I can't commit to 17 weeks of training because I'm caring for a sibling or a parent, or you know, I'm starting this later in life, I just can't commit to 17 weeks. Would that be okay if that person wanted to be a doctor and said, I can't commit to medical school, or they wanted to be a lawyer and I can't commit to going to law school? Like, there are certain things that we should say, I'm sorry, but if you can't commit, then maybe you shouldn't, this isn't the profession for you. I have seen single parents, single mothers, in fact, that have committed to the 17 weeks and made it through very successfully. And when you think about 17 weeks in a snapshot of time, that's really a very small time frame out of somebody's life. To come out with a certification for a profession that you can take somebody's liberty away, take somebody's life away. You know, 17 weeks, think about that. You know, doctors, we're not the same, but I mean, you know, doctors have the same liability. You make a mistake and you take somebody's life, but you've trained for how many years, and sometimes you don't have all the information when you're dealing with somebody, or something is a surprise when you're dealing with somebody that didn't come up. And it's, you know, I think it's sometimes people, when they think there's got to be another path to doing it, it's not that law enforcement is resistant to it, or even the academy is resistant to it, is what is that path and what's the best way to do it? Because regardless of what you might learn out in the field or in an educational institution, you're still going to need to be under the stress of what this job entails. You're still going to need to do scenario training to make sure that we're watching you and you're not using force inappropriately, or you're not using the proper techniques so that you jump to a higher level of force that you didn't need to go to had you learned it the right step-by-step process. So there's checks and balances, and I think it's very important for us to keep in mind that it's a high liability profession in many ways, aside from just, people's lives. I mean, every action that a law enforcement officer takes has an impact on somebody's life. And they may not see it, but it has an impact nonetheless. So we're comfortable with the way that we do it right now. And can we do better? You can always do better. But we want to make sure that we have eyes on what we're teaching people that are getting certifications so that they're doing it the right way. I don't know if that answers your question.
That's good.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Thank you for coming. You touched on something I found quite interesting. You discussed liability, life-changing decision-making process. Could you touch on qualified immunity and how that factors in your training with your candidates to be police officers, please?
That's really out of my ball to be speaking to. Qualified immunity is a legal doctrine. What we teach in the academy through our use of force is that it's justifiable and that we can articulate the reasons that we're using force. And qualified immunity is a whole other legal doctrine that I'm not qualified to speak on. I understand the importance of it, but I wouldn't really be qualified to speak on it because sometimes in real life it becomes an unfair level of expectation for somebody to try to prove. And I think you'll find that there's a substantial amount of people that might feel that way. But nonetheless, it's a legal doctrine that was beyond our scope. So what we try to make sure is that when we're teaching use of force or anything around de-escalation or accountability, is that we're articulating the reason that somebody is using force, that it's justifiable, and they have to be able to articulate that to a court and when they're doing that. I didn't mean to sidestep your question. It's just, I don't think that I'm the right person to answer that question for you.
Again, just in the context of, I think that'd be in terms of critical education for our police aspirants to understand, as you brought up, liability and life-changing and life-threatening decisions that can be made. And I realize it's a legal concept, but I understand that plays a significant role in a lot of decisions and policy making within police departments. So, thank you.
Sure. And you're right in that. One of the things that would make, I think, some people feel a little bit, I don't know, make you feel more secure, but give you a more solid understanding is if there were uniform policies across the country that everybody had the same standard that they were following, but they don't. And the reason I think that they don't is because every community is different. And I think you want something from your police department that might be different than what Manchester wants for theirs or what Brattleboro wants for theirs. Your community has your own makeup of citizens, and they come to you folks, and they come to your select board, and they say, these are the expectations that we have of our police department, and I'm sure that they go to the police department as well and voice their concerns. So when you have differing communities that have expectations that are different of the police, I think that sometimes makes it difficult to have really uniform statewide policies. Vermont is fairly good, though. Most of their policies are very close and similar. And I think again, I'll throw a plug into VLCT only because they are the body that insures the town, and they do provide sets of policies for agencies to follow. And they're done based on a lot of legal guidance. Their gentleman is from Rhode Island. He's a former law enforcement officer, and he's also an attorney. And so he kind of specializes in use of force defensibility, and he'll call out bad judgments and mistakes at the same time. So he's a good voice to have as somebody. He writes the policy for VLCT, but he's also a resource that the chief, I know I've used him before, where I said, here's a statewide policy that I have, but this piece doesn't fit in my community. I don't have a canine program, or I used to, and it doesn't fit in this way now. And he would give me guidance on how to modify that policy so that it did work and that it was still defensible. So policies are critical to making sure that not only that you have them, that you're training to them, and that your officers know what they are, and that they've signed off that they know what they are, because that's the best way to hold your own employees accountable for any kind of policy violations.
Yeah, I was just, and maybe this is a question for Paul, but you talked about internal affairs investigations, and some departments will do them themselves and some don't. I was wondering with the Bennington Police Department, do you do your own internally? Okay. Thanks.
And I'm going to go out on a limb and say, and I could be wrong, but if it was something that was too close to too many people, my guess is he would go to an outside agency to have them do that. And certainly if it was a criminal investigation, that's a clear, you go to another agency to have another agency do it.
Okay. Thanks.
Are there any questions from the audience?
I have a question.
Sorry.
Can you give us a little more elaboration about what an investigation looks like? Do they use lie detector tests? What kind of resources and tools do you use to investigate?
What types of investigations, or what happens in the investigation?
What happens in the investigations, I guess?
So essentially, it's up to the agency head to decide what they want to do for that internal affairs investigation, but that typically includes warning notices to their employee. Sometimes it includes putting that person on administrative leave while the investigation is being done. It outlines that they won't talk to other employees. If they do, that's a violation of the internal affairs policy. They're typically taken off duty while the investigation is ongoing, and they don't have any police authority when an internal affairs investigation is ongoing. And then depending upon what the complaint is, the investigation might entail, it will always entail talking to the officer themselves, but it will entail talking to witnesses, reviewing the complaint, the victim, if there's a victim in the complaint, the body camera video from the complaint, mobile video, if there's in-car camera that has to be reviewed, if there's exterior public cameras that are available that will capture some of whatever the event is that the complaint is about. It will definitely include policies, and then the agency head will review all of those policies to see now, one, if a code of conduct violation has occurred, but if there's a statewide policy or one of the department's own policies that have been violated, and that would be articulated not only to the officer involved, but it would be articulated to us as well. And there have been times when we get internal affairs investigations where the subcommittee will look at it and they'll say, we don't see this, like where this was mentioned in an interview, but we're not seeing this piece of evidence. Where is that? And we'll send it back to the agency to say, you're missing it, or the subcommittee wants to see this, do this extra piece of investigation, and then they're required to do that.
Are there any questions from the audience, community? Yeah, Jeannie.
Hi, I'm just thinking something that would be good to discuss.
Could you introduce yourself?
My name is Jeannie Jenkins, and I'm a former select board member, and I was on the board at the time we created the CPARB. And one of the, Chief, maybe I'm putting you on the spot to answer this. No, I mean, not in a bad way. But can you talk about part of the reason that we originally created the CPARB was to move, when the police department reviewed a case and it needed a second review because questions came up, or it was high profile and it made sense to do that, the body that does that right now is the select board. And we have had one case in all the, I guess, and maybe all of history, where the select board did review the review that the police department did. And we ended up concurring with the police department. Part of the reason to create the CPARB was to move that responsibility away from the select board, who did not know what they were doing, and so learned on the job, which is not a good way to learn, to another entity that could be trained, and that would be the CPARB. So that change is before the legislature right now. But I would love for the chief to come and talk about when that might occur and why, if you're comfortable doing that.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Okay. So, Paul Doucette, Chief of Police. So Jeannie raises a couple things, and it's difficult. I think that Director Raquel has done an excellent job so far. Jesse, your questions, your last question to the director, when we finally get our CPARB training underway, we're going to go over that question. You're going to see our policy. We're going to go over the policy. We're going to go over personnel manual. We're going to go over the current working agreement and all the things that come into play when we do an internal affairs investigation. So part of the requirement was that when we conducted an internal affairs investigation, it had to have civilian review. And that civilian review, if we had a problem, I would bring that to the town manager. We would review it and go from there. Then we had a situation where it needed to go in front of the entire select board, which should have probably taken an hour, went on for more than 3 hours because so many people, as Jeannie said, it was not clear on everything that was supposed to happen there. So we developed this board for all of you to become part of. And when we have a complaint that generates an internal affairs investigation, it gets investigated. I then meet with the chair and the vice chair with redacted information. We tell them about this much about what the complaint is about, and we provide that complaint to all of you, which many of you have not seen. We in the Bennington Police Department don't get a lot of unprofessional conduct complaints, which is great. But when we do get them, we take them very seriously. We meet with people, we interview them. As the director said, we put officers on notice. It's all explained in the policy on what needs to happen. And when that's complete, it may go up to the Vermont Criminal Justice Council for review, but it definitely, at the direction of the chair and vice chair, will come to this board for review, and we'll have that opportunity to review that complaint in an open meeting with redacted information. And as the director said, we don't just blurt out officers' names or communication specialist names. It's a personnel issue, and so there's a lot of fine lines that we have to walk to make sure that we're staying within compliance of Vermont law, and at the same time making sure that you all get to see complaints that we receive and investigate.
Except, can you speak to the changes that are being requested in the charter review?
I'm not comfortable talking about the charter review. I know that things have been requested and things like that, and there has to be decisions made on that. But I think that I don't want to muddy this up. I mean, the presentation was about Act 56. Okay, and what goes along with that. That's why we brought the director down, and I think that's maybe something that we need to probably put on the agenda if we're going to talk about those potential changes and make sure that everyone has time to look at those potential changes before we start talking about it. I mean, I'm prepared, but I think that we probably should have that on the agenda so that maybe it would spark the interest of other community members and they would want to be here also.
All right.
Okay?
That's fair.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Ms. Kelly.
I can read my writing. Hi, Kelly Carroll from Bennington. First of all, I want to thank you for taking the time to share some insight into Vermont's law enforcement training, but also for taking the time to drive down here and do it in person. So much appreciated. Thank you very much. I think it's helpful to talk about the challenges that the officers face as far and the structure and the standards and the intent for those standards. And I hope that the new CPAR members and the select board members, as Jeannie referenced, take this opportunity to set aside some of your preconceived views and approach your role with an open mind, open to focus on learning so that you can offer informed, constructive input on your advisory role. That's how you can build transparency and strengthen public trust. So thank you again. And I know that the council is determined by the governor and the legislatures, but if you ever do consider expanding that, I would hope that you would consider possibly reaching out and including a victim of violent crime in Vermont. So thank you again for what you do, and thank you to all law enforcement. So thanks.
If I could just respond to that a little bit. The council was just a few years back increased from 12 members to 24 members. And the reason was because the 12 members initially were almost all law enforcement, different branches or legal branches, and there really wasn't community input. The people that law enforcement interacts with every single day, right, those are the people that weren't represented. So the governor did expand it from 12 to 24. And I think, to not knowing a lot about your board, I want to, just thank you and congratulate you on being willing to take the time, understanding that it's an advisory board, right? That can be a great tool for the chief to have another body to bounce things off of. And what people, I think, sometimes tend to lose sight of, by law, internal affairs investigations are confidential, so there's only certain things that you can share. And when you get then to your select board and your town manager, if there's an employment action, sometimes they are the body that then has to hear the evidence, so they can't hear anything beforehand. So it really complicates things. So it's a complicated system. I think it works fairly well. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. But there's layers of safeguards that we hope we play in the certification role. There's good communication that we have, and we have that access back and forth that we can see those things that are confidential by law. So it puts a responsibility onto us as well to make sure that we're living up to the expectations that people have of, their law enforcement officers and of bodies like this. So thank you for the work that you're doing, and hope that that's a help to the chief as well.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Sean?
No questions, but thank you for doing this, guys. But at the same time, you guys got to remember, this is for the community. This is not a job. No. This is for the community. And the community is looking for you guys to really get down to business and really look at things and not, kind of be open, just like this woman said a few minutes ago. Just know it's going to be tough. Decisions going to be tough. But you guys got to be stand up and really be there for the community. Okay? So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Any others? All right. Thank you very, very much, Director Buckel.
Thank you for having me.
Chief, I think you wanted to give us just a short update. And so when we're...
I wanted to, Sean, I appreciate your comments. Director, thanks for being here.
Yes.
I just wanted to share with you very, very quickly, I know that there's been a lot of talk about the police department and our staffing levels. So I thought I'd share some good news with all of you. We have extended 3 offers of hire. We will have an officer starting with us next week, next Monday. She is a full-time certified law enforcement officer out of the state of Massachusetts who is moving up to the area here, and we're pleased to have her coming on board. And then 2 weeks later, we will have 2 young individuals pretty much fresh out of college, and they will be joining the Bennington Police Department and will be going off to the academy in February of 2026. So we are making some progress. We have some other people in the queue that we're looking at. We all know that we're down 8 and we're struggling a little bit, and so I wanted to share some positive news with you to let you know that we are making progress. Okay? Thank you.
Moving through the agenda, then, we have 2 new members, Scott Richmond and Lenny DuPont DeScorda.
Yes.
All right, thank you so much, and welcome to our group here. We'll then move to review the listening session comments. I'd just like to make one comment in terms of summary, that we interviewed staff from the hospital emergency department, as well as the Balloomsac apartment, respondents there, several residents, and the Bennington County Coalition on Homeless. We interviewed 2 staff members there. And the consensus that I found anyway was that they saw a big difference from the time CPAR, the resolution was set in 22 to today. So we're really talking about post-COVID, pre-COVID versus post-COVID, and that there were big differences in the way folks interacted with the department, and really found that there was a very helpful change, much more responsive than what it had been. So I'm open to other takeaways from the 3 listening sessions, if folks have comments. Any? Okay, doesn't sound like there are any. Oh, Jesse, did you want to? No? Okay. We still have a request out to the middle and high school students through their facilitators, counselors. We're just waiting to hear back from them about dates. Also wanted to mention that we've been in contact with folks from the local NAACP and trying to put together a listening session with them as well. So if anybody on the board or even from the community, if you've got suggestions about where we might have another listening session in order to get feedback, really appreciate you letting us know. Any suggestions from the board while I have you here? Okay. It occurs to me that to reach out to Bennington County Coalition on Homelessness, maybe we can put together a listening session with members of that community, with the homeless community, and see if we can put something together there. But other than that, all right. Since we're heading into November, cold weather, it becomes very important that we hear from them, but also find out other kinds of outreach. I mentioned in the listening sessions, in the comments, that the department has reached out to that community several times. Heard that from the Balloomsac apartment residents as well as from the coalition, and that the department has been very helpful in working with other agencies in collaboration, including AIDS services, wound care, and the usual, Turning Point and UCS, but also getting folks to Harvest House for meals, hooking them up with public services if that's what was possible and that's what they were asking for. So collectively, we'll all make efforts to help that community. Particularly as we move towards cold weather and the ban on fires continues, because that's also a risk for not just that group, but for the encampments, but also for the community at large. All right, any other thoughts, comments? No? All right. Then moving along, we've got our update on the Public Safety Education Forum on sentencing. As you know, we have 6 individuals who have all responded positively to that. I just wanted to announce who they were. It's Fred Bragdon from the Vermont Public Defender Office, Robert Plunkett, State Senator, Bennington District. He's on the Committee for Institutions and the Joint Legislative Justice Oversight Committee. Letha Cipriano, who's Executive Director for the Center for Restorative Justice. Ralph Bennett, who is the Director of Housing and Corrections at Turning Point. Gina Kondo, who's the District Manager at Probation Parole Department of Corrections. And Dr. Alia Reeve, who's Medical Director and Chief Medical Officer at United Counseling Services. The issue here is current sentencing and how it impacts not only crime prevention, but also safety in terms of successful completion of court orders. So, but the other part of that is we want to continue to improve the understanding of the role of CPARP in educating and informing the community. We're not an advocacy group. We work closely in collaboration with other community partners, as well as with the department and the select board, in really listening, but also then taking that information back to the department to advise them on what works, what doesn't, what may be needed in additional training. So, yeah. Any other thoughts or comments on the overall program, on the overall forum?
Just on the evaluation, it looks like 3 and 4 might be very similar.
Actually, they're taken directly from the purpose of the forum. So, so we have, because this was sort of the next point in the review, the improved understanding. This follows a similar format as the first forum in February. So provide an overview of the factors in sentencing that influence crime prevention strategies in Vermont, improve understanding on why offenders of serious crime are often released without any jail or prison time. Oh, I see, yeah. And then improve on of why offenders are off, okay, yes. Where did we go from here? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, you're absolutely correct. Thank you very much. Because the fourth one is really inform the public on the roles of public agencies. So thank you for that. Correct that. All right, any other comments? Questions? No? Okay. Then we have announcements. I have a couple. The October is Socktober, so please bring socks to the BPD, Bennington Banner, VFW, American Legion for those in need, and they'll be distributed at the end of the month. Yes.
Coming agenda.
Oh, sorry. It's been one of those days. I apologize. So we will have an evaluation of the forum. So we'll go through that data in December, at our December meeting. And we'd like to have a discussion of Vermont's pre-charge policy, procedure, and process in Bennington. And I wondered if there were any other upcoming agenda items for the December meeting.
Jeannie had brought up the potential changes to the charter review, which Chief Doucette said that maybe that should be an agenda item to discuss, so we had time to inform ourselves on that.
Yeah, I'll put it on. Others? Hearing none? No other future? Okay. So charter review. All right. Then circling back to announcements, apologize for that. And BPD has its budget meeting presentation in January. And the one of the organizations that we interviewed for the listening session, the Coalition on Homelessness, would like to be able to do a presentation. So we're looking at late April for our meeting in April. Any other announcements? Hearing none, okay. Meetings are on the fourth Thursday of the even months from 6 to 8 p.m. unless otherwise indicated. And for our December meeting, because of the holidays and where they land, I know this is in the middle of Hanukkah, so I apologize for this, but we needed a date. So it's Wednesday, December 17th is our next meeting at 6 p.m. in the firehouse in this room. Is there a motion to adjourn, or would you like? Yep. Yes, sir.
We're a little ahead of time, so I just want to touch base on something very quickly. I do believe that we should talk about the potential charter changes.
Yeah,
but I think before we do that and muddy things up, potentially, I think that we need to take the opportunity to get our new folks through training.
Okay.
So that everybody has a clear understanding of what actually happens now. Having Director Brickell here this evening was amazing. It's a lot to digest. And I can tell you that I review Act 56 on a regular basis, just because sometimes it can be confusing. And so with that being said, I would love to be able to get folks through the training. 2 of our background checks are done and complete, and we started another today, and we're hoping that does not take nearly as long as others. So let's try to I know that December is a ways away. I'd like to get through the training before that. I know we're coming into the holidays. And then during the training opportunities, you'll have the opportunity to ask Lieutenant Grandy and I and all of our staff that present to you questions. And so I would just like that opportunity to make sure that we're doing that. The only other thing I'd like to say, 2 more things. I know you mentioned Socktober, but bring your socks to the Bennington Police Department. We want to collect the most, so let's not forget that. And 2, Lieutenant Grandy was on an assignment and was not here at the initial part of this meeting, but I do think that we owe Lieutenant Grandy some recognition. Yesterday we traveled up to Montpelier, and Lieutenant Grandy did receive an award from the Vermont Highway Safety Office. It's a Lifetime Achievement Award, and for all of his efforts in highway safety, and I think he does deserve a round of applause from the people that are here, because he worked hard to earn that. Thank you. It's just one example of the efforts that members of the Bennington Police Department make, and you know, with his efforts, you know, he was recognized yesterday with other officers from around the state of Vermont, and it definitely was well deserved. And I appreciate all of his hard work that he does to make our department successful. So, with that being said, again, remember, socks to the Bennington Police Department. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Other comments? Yep.
There's a dozen socks in my car if you can hold off. Like I said, I picked them up earlier.
I don't have one of those get out of jail free cards, so I'll just take the socks. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Any other comments, thoughts? All right.
Make a motion, we adjourn.
Need a second? You have to say it out loud.
He doesn't want it to end.
Yeah, no. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Any absent? Yeah. Thank you. Sometimes the words don't come.